It started like any other morning. But isn't that how the most life-altering days usually begin? You never expect change to arrive on an ordinary Tuesday, quietly disguised in a coffee maker box. I'm Brittany, 60 years old, divorced for over a decade. And despite having everything I thought I'd ever wanted, retirement savings, a cozy house, a decent garden, I felt hollow. Not in a dramatic, desperate way. No, mine was the kind of quiet loneliness that settles in like dust. You don't notice it until it's everywhere. I'd been meaning to replace the coffee maker for months. The old one was leaking, sputtering, clinging to its last breath like an aging friend who just won't leave the party. But today, for some reason, I decided enough was enough. Maybe it was the way the morning light spilled across my kitchen tile, or the way the silence echoed off the walls. So I got dressed jeans, an old t-shirt, hair hastily pinned up, and headed to the appliance store 2 blocks away. I didn't know that walking out my front door that day would be the last time I'd feel completely alone. I remember the store was busier than I'd expected. A younger employee approached me, cheerful, kind. His name was Jake. He couldn't have been more than 23. Bright eyes, eager smile. That millennial mix of confidence and casualness. When I told him what I needed, he didn't just point me to the aisle. He walked me there, picked out a model, made suggestions. He was charming without trying. That's the part that disarmed me. Most people are either too polished or completely indifferent. But Jake, he seemed to really see me. "Would you like help carrying it to your car?" he asked. I hesitated. It wasn't heavy, just bulky, but something made me nod. Yes. Actually, thank you. 10 minutes later, we were standing in my driveway. Jake looked at the box, then at my front door. "I could help set it up too, if you want," he offered. Normally, I'd have said no. I'm not helpless. But that day, my guard was softer. Maybe it was his voice, or the way he wasn't in a rush to leave. "That would be kind of you," I said. Sometimes, the heart opens in the quietest ways. Not with a bang, but a nudge. Let's pause here. This isn't about a coffee maker, or even Jake, really. It's about the moment you stop resisting help, not because you need it, but because something inside you wants to feel less invisible. There's a kind of ache that builds when you live alone for years. You learn to function, to cope, but every now and then, someone crosses your path who doesn't look past you. They look into you. That's what Jake did. And that, dear listener, is where everything began. As he stepped inside, my heart fluttered, not romantically, not yet. More like a ripple of self-consciousness, the kind you get when someone new enters your sacred, silent space. And then I saw it. I'd left my personal items out, not just clutter, intimate things. A small pink box on the couch, a silky garment thrown over the armrest. The type of things you stop hiding when you live alone long enough. Panic flushed through me. Jake noticed them. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me, then back at the couch, then back at me. "You live alone, don't you?" he asked, casually, not mockingly, just observing. I could feel my cheeks burning. Yes, I do," I replied. "It's okay," he said, gently. "You don't have to explain." But I wanted to, not to justify what he saw, but to explain the ache behind it. The comfort objects, the silence I'd filled with soft fabrics, scented candles, and stories in my head. Here's something no one tells you about aging. Your body isn't the only thing that changes. Your relationship with shame does too. Things you'd have hidden in your 30s feel oddly unimportant in your 60s until someone sees them. I wanted to shrink, to rewind time and neatly tuck everything away. But Jake didn't laugh. He didn't leer. He said, "It's human. Don't worry." And I believed him. There's a strange magic in being seen by someone much younger, not as someone's mother, not as a relic of youth, but as a person. Whole, still beautiful, still interesting. It reminded me of something an older friend once told me. Loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about being unseen. Jake didn't see an old woman. He saw a woman. And in that moment, so did I. As Jake set up the coffee maker, I moved quietly, watching him work. His energy filled the space, breaking the quiet in a way that didn't feel intrusive. It felt welcome. When he plugged it in and the machine beeped to life, I smiled. Not because I could finally brew a cup of coffee, but because something inside me had stirred. I didn't know it then, but that small exchange, the glance, the silence, the blush would be the thread that unraveled everything I thought I'd tucked away. This wasn't the beginning of a scandal. It was the beginning of a story I never thought I'd be brave enough to live. There's a specific kind of silence that follows vulnerability when you've just exposed something personal and the other person hasn't turned away. That silence isn't empty. It's full, with possibilities, with fear, with the question, what happens next? Jake had just set up the coffee maker. The appliance hummed softly on the counter, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. My cheeks still burned from the embarrassment. Though he'd been kind, nonchalant, I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to being looked at like a woman, just a woman, not someone's mother, not someone's past, just me. And that unsettled me more than I expected. Jake turned to me with a grin. All done. It'll brew the strongest cup this side of town. I nodded, still unsure what to say. Would you like a coffee? I asked, just to fill the space. Sure, he said. If you're having one. I busied myself gathering mugs, my hands slightly unsteady. I hated how nervous I was, not because I felt threatened, but because something inside me was waking up, and I hadn't decided whether to let it. I poured the coffee and slid one of the mugs to him. He took a sip and smiled. Perfect. He sat at my kitchen table like he belonged there, like this was a normal day, like we were normal. I joined him across the table. We talked about silly things at first. His job, my retirement, the weather, and then, as minutes passed, the conversation shifted. When older women and younger men talk, there's often a strange dance between maternal familiarity and something deeper. I wasn't trying to flirt, but I wasn't hiding myself either. And Jake wasn't looking at me with puppy dog naivete. He was curious, open, undistracted. It's rare to have anyone fully present with you. He asked what I used to do. I told him I'd been a high school counselor. That makes sense, he said. You've got that calm, wise vibe. Like you've seen everything but still care. That one sentence hit me harder than I expected. He saw something in me I hadn't acknowledged in years. Not just that I'd aged, but that I had value because of it. Are you alone? I asked him. He nodded, eyes lowering briefly. Yeah, moved here a year ago. Just me and work. I could tell he didn't like talking about it, and I didn't press. That was the first moment I realized. We were both lonely in different ways. His was the solitude of someone starting out. Mine was the quiet ache of someone who'd stopped expecting anything new. And yet here we were, two people sitting across from each other, from opposite ends of life's road, sharing a table, and something more than coffee. Studies show that when people maintain eye contact and mirror each other's body language, they feel more emotionally attuned even if they're strangers. It's not always about romance. Sometimes it's about recognition. Jake wasn't just looking at me, he was seeing me. That changes everything. I got up to rinse the mugs. Jake stood too. I should probably head back, he said. Don't want to keep you from your day. But I didn't want him to go. Not out of desperation, but because I suddenly felt more alive than I had in months. Actually, I said, more boldly than I intended. Do you have a few more minutes? I wouldn't mind the company. He smiled. Sure. I motioned toward the living room. But as we entered, the reality of the scene struck me again. Those personal items still lying casually on the couch. It felt symbolic now, like they'd become part of the story unfolding between us. He sat on one end of the couch. I sat on the other. There was a space between us, but not the kind you measure in inches. The air felt charged. I decided to break the silence. Jake, I said lightly, are you always this charming? Or is this a special occasion? He chuckled. Depends. Am I doing okay? I smiled. More than okay. The conversation that followed wasn't flirtation, it was alignment. Our stories came out in pieces. His parents had divorced when he was 12. He'd been raised by his aunt. I told him about my own divorce, How I'd grown used to being alone. Isn't it funny? He said quietly. How easy it is to get used to sadness. That one sentence. That was the moment something clicked inside me. I realized I was ready to let my guard down. Just a little. So I asked a question that surprised even me. Do you ever feel like you missed something important? Like life passed you by while you were trying to do everything right? Jake didn't answer right away. Then he nodded slowly. All the time. There it was again. Connection. Not just in the abstract, but in the marrow of our stories. People think age gap stories are all about sex, but the truth is often deeper. The older person seeks renewal. The younger one seeks grounding. In between, they find a mirror, a way to reimagine the self through a different lens. The room fell quiet, and yet, it wasn't uncomfortable. Jake looked at me and said, softly, "You're not what I expected." I smiled. "Neither are you." And then I said something impulsive. I should change into something more comfortable. I've been in these jeans all day. Jake nodded politely. I went upstairs. Not to seduce, but to breathe. Looking at myself in the mirror, I hesitated, and then I chose a soft, flowing dress I hadn't worn in years. I wasn't trying to impress him. I just wanted to feel good, like a woman again. I hadn't touched that dress in years. It was tucked in the back of my closet, more a memory than a garment. Soft navy silk, thin straps. The kind of dress you wear when you feel beautiful, not when you need to prove it. I didn't pick it out for Jake. I picked it out for me, because for the first time in what felt like forever, I wanted to feel something again. Something alive. Something more than just fine. I smoothed the fabric down over my hips, fixed my hair, touched up my lipstick not too much, just enough to match the courage it took to wear that dress again. When I walked downstairs, I expected Jake to still be in the living room, maybe scrolling on his phone. But he was standing by the doorway facing me, and he looked up. Our eyes met. There was a moment, a long, stretched, breathless moment. He didn't say anything, not at first. Then, softly, "Wow." That was it. Just wow. But it held more meaning than any flattery I'd received in years. "I haven't worn this in forever," I said, trying to sound casual. "You look incredible," he said, almost apologetically, like he wasn't sure he should. And suddenly, all the walls I'd carefully built over the years, brick by brick, experience by experience, felt like they were cracking. I smiled, sat down across from him, and crossed my legs. The fabric of the dress shifted slightly. His eyes noticed, but respectfully. Psychologists say clothing is a form of self-communication. When you wear something bold, it's not always about external validation. Often, it's about telling yourself that you're still here, still desirable, still capable of change. That's what the dress meant to me. Not seduction, reclamation. We talked more. About nothing, really. The kind of talk that dances around what you really want to say. Then, Jake said something that surprised me. "You know, when I first saw you in the store, I hoped you'd talk to me longer." I tilted my head. "Why?" "I don't know. You seemed calm, but curious. Like you were watching the world instead of rushing through it. People my age don't do that." I laughed, lightly. "That's just code for, you looked old, but wise." "Shh," he grinned. "Maybe. But that's not a bad thing." He paused, then added, "Honestly, I like older women." I froze. He said it so plainly, so earnestly, like he didn't know what kind of bomb he'd just dropped. My heart skipped. Not because I was shocked, but because I was suddenly unsure of the line I was standing on. "I'm flattered," I said. "But Jake, I'm more than twice your age." He nodded. "I know, but I'm here. Aren't I?" We were quiet for a while. The air in the room changed. The tension wasn't awkward. It was electric. Not sexual yet, but undeniably charged. Age gap intimacy often draws criticism. But it's worth asking. What draws us to someone? Sometimes it's shared trauma. Sometimes it's curiosity. And sometimes it's the feeling of finally being seen when you thought you'd become invisible. That's what Jake was giving me. I broke the silence. "Tell me something," I said. "Are you single? Got a girlfriend somewhere?" He laughed. "No, I'm very much alone." I nodded. How do you usually spend your nights? Jake's eyes flickered. Usually, streaming shows, scrolling. Wondering why I feel so restless all the time. I leaned forward. And today, he looked at me directly. Today feels different. I could feel the pull between us growing stronger. It wasn't about lust. Not yet. It was about recognition, mutual loneliness, a quiet magnetism neither of us had expected. Then I did something bold. I got up from my seat, walked over, and sat beside him closer than before. He didn't move. I crossed one leg over the other, adjusted the hem of my dress, and turned slightly toward him. "Jake," I said, gently teasing. "You keep looking at me like you want to ask something." He blushed slightly. "I guess I'm just trying to figure this out." "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "Just don't pretend this moment isn't real." He nodded. "I won't." I looked down at his hands. They were resting on his thighs, slightly clenched. Without thinking, I reached out and placed mine over his. He exhaled. And just like that, the moment turned. Not into something inappropriate, but into something irreversible. Skin-to-skin contact releases oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. A simple touch, especially when unexpected, can dissolve emotional barriers. It isn't always romantic. Sometimes, it's just human. That moment, my hand on his wasn't about seduction. It was about trust, and the space we allowed each other to step into it. Jake turned his hand slightly and held mine in return. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, though it must have been minutes. No words, no movement, just two people who'd been walking through separate deserts, finally finding water. I leaned my head back on the couch and whispered, "It's been a long time since I've let someone sit this close." Jake replied, "It's been a long time since I wanted to." I don't know how long we sat like that, but I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like when the loneliness lifts. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was gentle, almost sacred. There's a kind of beauty that isn't about youth. It's the beauty of being seen, not despite your years, but because of them. And that evening, as I sat beside Jake in my living room, holding his hand, I felt it. Not the kind of beauty that turns heads on the street, but the kind that reaches beneath the skin. Quiet, real. We sat there in silence, still holding hands. No music, no distractions, just our breaths. Jake's thumb lightly brushed the back of my hand. It was such a small thing, but it made my heart flutter. I realized then that I was no longer afraid of being wanted. I was afraid of believing it could last. He looked at me steady, sincere. "You're beautiful, Brittany," he said. I smiled softly, unsure what to say. He added, "I mean it. You carry yourself like you've lived, not like you're hiding. That's rare." And that's when it happened. Something inside me softened, unlatched, and let him in. Many women, especially older women, can tell the difference. Attention is fleeting. It's reactive. Affection is attentive. It notices the parts of you others overlook. Jake wasn't just noticing me. He was understanding me. That was the difference. I stood up slowly, letting go of his hand. "Can I show you something?" I asked. He nodded. I reached for a dusty photo album tucked into a shelf. Not because I wanted to show off old memories, but because I wanted to let him into the real parts of me. We sat cross-legged on the floor as I flipped through pictures me in my 20s, holding my daughter, smiling at long-lost friends. Jake listened to every word, not like someone humoring me, but like someone curious about who I was before today. "You were stunning," he whispered at one photo of me on a beach. I laughed. "Was." He turned to me. "Still are." And just like that, I believed him, not because of how I looked, but because of how he looked at me. Jeanne, a 61-year-old widow from Montreal, shared her story online about meeting a 26-year-old art student, Malik, at a community painting class. Their bond started with small talk and evolved into deep conversations. They didn't rush into anything. For Jeanne, it was about rediscovering her voice. For Malik, it was about finding a compass. When asked about the age gap, Jeanne said, "I never felt younger. I just felt real." And after years of feeling invisible, that was enough. Stories like these aren't fiction. They happen when two people meet without a script. just like Jake and I. We flipped through the last page of the album. He looked at me quietly, then asked, "Do you ever feel like you've got more to give, but no one's asking for it?" I swallowed. "Yes," I whispered, "every day." And that's when the shift began. Not in his words, not in mine, in the way we both stayed present, open, unworried. Jake reached for my hand again, not to take it, just to feel it. And then, as naturally as anything in life, he leaned forward slightly. I didn't stop him, not because I was desperate, but because I was ready. Our lips touched softly, slowly. There was no rush, no hunger, just two people tasting a moment they never thought they'd have. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said it all. For the first time in a long time, I felt beautiful again. Not because someone said so, but because someone meant it. It's easy to forget who you are when the world stops asking. But when someone enters your life and listens, truly listens, it's like waking up in a body you'd forgotten you lived in. That kiss wasn't a promise. It was a reminder that I still had a story left to tell. We moved from the floor back to the couch, both of us a little overwhelmed. He looked nervous now, not unsure of me, but unsure of himself. "I've never been in a moment like this," he said. I smiled. "Me neither." Jake chuckled. "But you've lived so much more, which just means I've spent more time being afraid," I said. "But tonight I'm not." We sat shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, just listening to the quiet of the house. I leaned my head gently on his shoulder. Jake reached for my hand once more and said, "I don't know where this goes, but I don't want to pretend I'm not feeling something." Neither did I. And for now, that was enough. There's a moment in every unexpected connection when time splits into before and after. Before, I was a woman shaped by habit, loss, and quiet resignation. After, I was someone daring to believe in possibility again. And all of it hinged on the way Jake looked at me, not with hesitation, but with hope. That night, after our kiss, we didn't rush into anything else. Instead, we sat in the quiet. Jake eventually stretched his legs out, leaning his head back on the couch, eyes closed but smiling. I mirrored him. We were just there. Two people in the same moment, not needing to prove anything. But in my mind, a quiet storm brewed. How would the world judge this? Would my friends understand? Would I? And then I remembered something my therapist once told me, years ago after my divorce. The life you're meant to live doesn't always look like the life you planned. Jake wasn't part of any plan, but that didn't make him any less real. When you've spent decades being a caregiver, a wife, a fixer, it becomes hard to receive. To let someone give you something without guilt. Jake wasn't just offering attention, he was offering presence. And receiving that felt scarier than loneliness ever did. "Do you regret inviting me in?" Jake asked softly. I shook my head. "I regret not putting the dress on sooner." He laughed. A light, youthful sound that made my chest ache with affection. There was a stillness between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full of unsaid things. I leaned closer. "Do you want to stay a little longer?" I asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Yes." We didn't move upstairs right away. First, we just held each other sitting sideways on the couch, my back pressed to his chest. His arms wrapped around me like he was trying to protect something delicate. "Is this okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It's more than okay." It wasn't about seduction. It was about warmth, closeness. The way his breath on my neck reminded me I was alive. Skin contact reduces cortisol and increases oxytocin. For people who've gone years without being held, physical touch can feel like medicine and emotional balm that says, "You matter." I didn't need Jake to love me. I just needed him to feel me. And he did. Eventually, we moved upstairs, quietly, like we were carrying something sacred. In the soft light of my bedroom, I turned to him and asked, "Are you sure about this?" He nodded, eyes steady. I've never been more sure. We didn't rush. We undressed with reverence, not lust. He touched me like he was learning a new language, and I let him. Because for once, I wasn't shrinking to fit someone's desire. I was expanding into someone's admiration. Later, lying beside him in bed, I watched his chest rise and fall. He looked at peace, like something had shifted in him, too. "Do you think this changes anything?" he asked. I turned to him. Everything, and yet nothing at all. Because at its core, this wasn't about an affair, or scandal, or age. It was about need, connection, healing. Most people imagine regret, shame, conflict. But in real life, what often follows is silence and a new clarity. You wake up not in confusion, but in presence. You realize the line you feared wasn't a boundary, it was a doorway. Jake didn't make me young again. He reminded me I was never too old to matter. The morning light crept through the curtains. Jake stirred and smiled at me like I was familiar already. "I should probably go," he said gently. "I know," I whispered. "We didn't make any promises." That wasn't the point. Before he left, he turned at the door. "I don't know what this was," he said, "but I'm grateful for it." I smiled. "So am I." After he left, I stood by the window, watched him walk to his car, and I realized I wasn't sad, I was changed. This wasn't the start of a love story. It was the end of my waiting, and the beginning of me as I hadn't known myself in years. After Jake left, the house felt different. Not emptier, not lonelier, just quieter, like it had exhaled with me. I made myself coffee with the new machine, and as it brewed, I looked around my kitchen, the same sink, the same fridge magnets, the same quiet air, but I wasn't the same, and that mattered more than anything. I wasn't replaying the night with guilt or fear. I was unfolding it, what it meant, why it happened, what I was meant to take from it, and the answer wasn't what most people would expect. It wasn't about passion, or age, or proving I still had it. It was about presence. Here's the difference between being lonely and longing for connection. Loneliness is passive. Longing is active. Jake didn't fill a void. He met me at the edge of it and stayed long enough to remind me what warmth feels like. That afternoon, I did something unusual. I cleaned. Not because the house was messy, but because I needed to rearrange my space to match what had shifted inside me. I folded the dress, hung it neatly, didn't hide it. I put the photo album back, but not as deep in the shelf. I even left one of the mugs we used sitting by the sink, not as a symbol, just as a truth. It happened, and it didn't need to be erased. Later that day, I went for a walk, and I saw myself in the reflection of a shop window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look past myself. I didn't critique my wrinkles or adjust my posture. I just looked and nodded, like I was saying, "Welcome back." That night, I journaled, not out of ritual, but necessity, and as I wrote, I found myself repeating one thought: I am still allowed to feel. I am still allowed to change. Aging is not an erasure, it's an evolution, and somehow, Jake had become part of that. A woman named Carla, 58, wrote an essay for a lifestyle journal about how a brief connection with a younger coworker made her reevaluate her identity, not because they dated, but because he respected her ideas. "I stopped apologizing for my age," she wrote. "I started showing up in red lipstick again, not for men, but because I finally remembered I liked how it made me feel." It doesn't take a relationship to wake us up. Sometimes, just one person seeing you clearly is enough. Jake was that person for me. I didn't hear from him the next day, or the day after, but I didn't need to. We hadn't made promises. We hadn't exchanged illusions. What we shared was complete in itself. That's something not many people understand. Some of the most transformative connections are not lifelong. They're brief, intense, and honest. We don't always need a sequel. Sometimes, we just need to know that what we felt was real. Jake gave me that gift, and I gave it to myself by letting him in. A week later, I received a small note in the mail, no name on the envelope, just handwriting I now recognized. Inside, a simple card with one sentence: "You reminded me that connection is still possible." No signature, just truth. I smiled. No butterflies, no daydreams, just peace. Because sometimes, the closure is the connection, and you don't need to own someone to cherish what they gave you. That night, I turned off the lights and sat on my couch, the same one where Jake and I first talked. But now, It didn't feel like a place I was waiting for life to find me. It felt like a place I had reclaimed, a space I was finally inhabiting, not just decorating. And somewhere in the quiet, I whispered aloud, "Thank you for reminding me who I am." When people think about transformative experiences, they usually imagine something grand, a proposal, a new job, a plane ticket to somewhere far away. But sometimes, transformation arrives quietly. No announcement, no big gesture, just 2 cups of coffee, a shared silence, and someone who sees you differently than you see yourself. Jake was gone, not from the world, of course, but from my daily life. And yet, I carried him with me, not as a fantasy, but as a truth I'd earned. He had reminded me of things I didn't know I'd forgotten. That touch can be gentle and unassuming. That being wanted is not the same as being used. That I was still a woman with desires, humor, and curiosity. I hadn't lost any of those things. They'd just been sleeping. Not all relationships are meant to last forever. Some arrive to wake you up, teach you something, and leave gently without damage, without regret. Jake was never mine to keep, but the version of myself I met when I was with him, that version stays. A few weeks passed. The world didn't change. My life didn't explode. But I noticed subtle shifts. I started dressing for myself again, wearing perfume, trying new recipes, answering the phone on the first ring instead of letting it go to voicemail. None of it was about Jake. It was about me. I had come home to myself. I didn't tell my daughter, not because I was ashamed, but because it was mine. There's power in having a secret that isn't about hiding, but about honoring something sacred. We're told so often to share everything. Post it, announce it, validate it. But intimacy, real intimacy, is quiet. It doesn't need an audience. Ellen, 64, wrote an anonymous blog post titled "The Quiet Chapter." In it, she described a brief romance with a man 30 years younger that occurred during a painting retreat in Italy. They shared 4 days, long walks, a bottle of wine, and one slow evening under the stars. She wrote, "We never exchanged last names. We didn't need to. He reminded me that I'm still someone worth choosing, even if only for a night." That memory doesn't haunt me. It heals me. Like Ellen, I hadn't just had an experience. I'd rewritten the chapter of myself that I thought was already closed. Some days, I still find myself thinking of Jake. Not obsessively, not longingly, just occasionally. When the light falls a certain way in the living room, when the coffee brews just right, when I catch myself smiling without knowing why, he's not a ghost. He's a landmark. Proof that I crossed a threshold and kept walking. In our culture, we often ask, was it worth it? Did it last? What came of it? But maybe the better question is, did it wake something inside you that was asleep? If the answer is yes, then it was enough. I found a photo online recently. Nothing special. Just an image of a coffee maker like the one Jake helped install. But it made me pause. I didn't feel a pang. I felt a pulse. That subtle, undeniable reminder that life isn't over just because the plan didn't unfold the way I wrote it at 30. At 60, life is different, slower, softer, but no less vivid. Sometimes, even more vivid because you finally pay attention. That night, I returned to my journal, same soft light, same chair. But this time, my entry was simple. I don't need him to come back. I just need to stay awake. Jake was the lightning, but I was the sky. And now, I was clearing. When I was younger, I thought I had my story figured out. Love, marriage, a home, children. A gradual, graceful fade into old age surrounded by family, filled with purpose. And then life happened. Plans changed. People left. Chapters ended without warning. What I didn't know was this. Some stories begin after you think they're over. I used to envy women who had a second act. The ones who started businesses at 50, moved to Spain at 60, fell in love again at 65. I didn't think that could be me, because my story felt finished. But then, Jake happened, and I realized your story isn't done just because the world stops asking about it. You are still writing it, every day, So many older women feel erased not just by society, but by their own inner voices that whisper, "It's too late." But what if that voice is lying? What if the story isn't finished? It's just waiting for you to reclaim the pen. Jake didn't rescue me. He reminded me, and then I rescued myself. I kept living, not as someone waiting for anything, but as someone participating in her own life again. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a community garden, even went on a second date with someone closer to my age, someone kind. But no experience since Jake has matched what that one night gave me. Permission to feel, to want, to begin again. I kept living, not as someone waiting for anything, but as someone participating in her own life again. I joined a book club, started volunteering at a community garden, even went on a second date with someone closer to my age, someone kind. But no experience since Jake has matched what that one night gave me. Permission to feel, to want, to begin again. Sometimes I wonder, was Jake meant to stay longer? But then I remember we weren't a forever story. We were a turning point. He showed up at the moment I needed truth more than consistency. And that truth was this: I was not done living. I was not unworthy of tenderness. I was not invisible. Gloria Steinem once said, "Women grow radical with age." One day we simply wake up and say, "I don't have time for things that don't matter." That's what happened to me. Jake didn't radicalize me. Age did. But he was the spark that made me light the match. I get messages sometimes from friends who notice a change. "You're glowing. You seem lighter. Did you cut your hair?" I didn't. But what they're noticing is not a new look. It's a new permission. I don't hide my joy now. I don't lower my voice. I don't apologize for my past. Because every chapter made me who I am, even the quiet ones, even the broken ones, even the short, sparkling ones like Jake. Here's what I've learned, and what I hope every woman listening hears loud and clear. You are never too old to feel deeply. You are never too far gone to be seen clearly. You are never too late to rewrite what the world told you was already written. I tell this story not because I think everyone needs a Jake, but because everyone deserves a reminder to touch their own skin, to hear their own laughter, to want again. I didn't think that story was mine, but I was wrong. Jake may never knock on my door again, and that's okay. He opened something far more important than a door. He opened my capacity to feel again, to want, to write, and I won't let that door close. Not ever again. If you've listened this far, thank you. My story isn't extraordinary. It's not scandalous. It's not even rare. But it is mine, and that makes it sacred. So I ask you, what story have you told? Yourself is over? Because maybe, just maybe, it's not.